Good afternoon. Hello, hello. Welcome to Facebook Live. This is a new series that I have just started. You can find me here every Monday around 12 o'clock noon. So hopefully you're on your lunch break or maybe just a break just to keep your sanity as you are planning your wedding. And I'm so excited to share some tips that I have just seen at weddings. I'm a wedding photographer for those of you who do not know, and my name is Audrey, and I'm just sharing some tips from different things that I've noticed at weddings and from my perspective. So excited to have this going, and excuse the craziness. There's some boxes behind me. We are actually getting ready to move next weekend, so in between planning this, I've just been moving everything and putting it in boxes. So if y'all have tips about moving and packing, y'all can help me out and give me some tips about moving. But anyways, so today's topic, I'm so excited. It's going to be really fun. It's all about wedding seasons and what you need to know from a photographer's perspective. And one thing that I've noticed is when you first get engaged, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, should I pick a venue first? Should I make a budget? Should I make a guest list? And there's so many things going on in your mind. So I'm just going to start off with something fun that y'all can think of is wedding season. And that's really like when you're picking a date, that's one of the first things that you should think about is what time of year do I want to have my wedding or even engagement session. This can apply to that as well. So first season that I want to talk about, and as I go through these, I'm just going to kind of give y'all tips of what I see are the pros and cons of each season and kind of how that affects your photography. Just some tips that you may not think about. So when you are picking a wedding date, here's some things that you might want to consider as you're like, oh, should we do a fall wedding or should we do a spring wedding or summer? I actually posted on my personal Facebook about what season do you guys think is the most popular season for weddings, and surprisingly most people were right. They said, oh, I think the fall is the most popular time. And that is true, and I think spring is probably will come in second place. For me as a photographer, my fall dates are the most requested. And I think it's kind of changed because when my parents, when they got married in the summer. So a lot of people, some people commented, and y'all know who you are, and they put, oh, I think the summer is the most popular time for weddings. And sadly enough, that's becoming not true. Summer is kind of, to me, is my slow season, which is crazy. You think winter might be slower, but for me, summer is kind of when I'm just chilling out. So we're going to start off with the first season that's going on right now. We're in winter. Right now is winter. And if you're in Georgia, that's where we're at. Is we live in Georgia, and it's kind of crazy. You don't know what you're gonna get with winter, whether it's snow or rain. Today is actually sunny, which is weird. I looked at the weather for the next week, and it's supposed to rain every day. And then I think next, if y'all look on it, on my phone at least, it said it might snow next Saturday. And I'm like, oh, we just had snow. No, stop it. So you just never know with winter. So that's one of the cons with having a winter wedding date is the weather. Especially in Georgia, we're not really prepared for snow or ice very well. I think we've gotten better over the years. We've kind of learned our lesson that if it does snow, we have snow trucks and ice with like salt. We have salt more, but it's still pretty bad if it snows. I actually had a wedding a couple weeks ago. It was in December, and it snowed the week that couple days before their wedding, and I was just like so nervous for them because had it snowed people might not have gone to their wedding. Ooh, that's really scary. I mean, it would have been beautiful for their photos if I could make it there. So that's one of the cons of having a winter wedding, would be that gamble of weather. So one thing I would recommend is, if you do have a winter wedding planned, maybe ask your wedding vendors, what are their policies for weather? Do they have a backup plan? Or even the venue, they might cancel on you, which would really stink. If it snowed and you couldn't have your wedding, that would be really awful. One thing to also consider with winter weddings is football. So we have the Super Bowl coming up. And if your fiance or any of his groomsmen are really involved in football, think of that, because I have photographed so many weddings where the groomsmen and the groom are watching football, and it is like pulling teeth to get them to take pictures at the time that we schedule to take pictures. And I feel like such a bad guy when I come in the room and I'm like, hey, it's time for y'all's photos. And they are just glued to the screen because their favorite team is playing or anything like that. So, especially if they're keeping up with updates and stuff, I'm not really into football or know much about it. But definitely look at the football schedule and see if anything falls around the time of your wedding, because that would be really unfortunate to have wedding guests say, oh, we were going to come to your wedding, but now we're just going to stay home and watch a football game. That would be terrible. But one of the pros of having a winter wedding is that it's the off season. Usually December, I would say December through, I guess, March, early March is considered off season for a lot of wedding venues and vendors in the wedding industry. So if you are really hoping to work with some vendors and have your wedding at a very specific wedding venue, chances are in the winter they're probably not booked, and you might be able to snag them, and you might be able to snag them maybe at a discounted price because it is the off season. So that's just a quick tip. So if you are like really hoping like to work with a wedding vendor, whether it's a photographer or a videographer, and they're usually booked up the whole year, think about winter, because you might be able to have them at your wedding. Chances are, because it's slower. So the next season is spring coming up, and how many of you guys are I'm so ready for spring to be here. I'm done with this winter. It's been too cold and weird and snowing and ice and all that. I'm ready for spring. And spring, I think, is the second most popular wedding season, at least to me, if you asked me. I think spring is very popular because it finally starts to feel warm outside. And I think spring, one of the pros of spring is that it provides this just beautiful, when the trees start to bloom and you have this green start popping up, it can give you like the bright and airy kind of look, if that's something that you are really into. Brighter colors, you can do brighter flowers and even any colors with your wedding. In the springtime, you can do brighter stuff compared to like fall or winter. You can get away with like really pink bridesmaid dresses. Yeah, my mom just posted, what's the most popular? Definitely fall. Fall is definitely most popular, at least in my opinion. And I'm sure if you ask different vendors what their most popular date is or time of year, they probably have different seasons that are most popular for them. I don't know. I know planners get really busy the beginning of the year because brides are planning their wedding. So their answer might be a little different. I actually talked to a planner and they said, oh, the fall for me is kind of slower. And I'm like, what? To me, it's just crazy because I'm going to the weddings and stuff. So fall is, I think, my number one. But with spring, spring I think is the second most popular. One thing that you want to think about with spring weddings that I've noticed a lot with taking pictures is pollen. In Georgia, it gets yellow. Everything turns yellow, and I don't know the exact date. I feel like it's like after Easter, April, May, and it just starts getting yellow, and it's like if you have a red car, it turns orange. So pollen kind of gets really intense here. So if you have a spring wedding and you're thinking about picking a spring date, definitely think about the pollen and allergies. If you at all have allergies in the springtime, I would highly advise maybe picking a date earlier in the spring when it doesn't hit so hard. I don't know, I did a wedding last spring and the pollen was so bad that the chairs they had outside were covered in pollen, so they had to wipe off pollen off the chairs, and they were white, so the pollen showed up so much. And even the second after you wiped off the pollen, it came back. It was that bad. Everything was yellow. You could see it in the air, like a fine dust of pollen. And whew, I was taking Claritin, all sort of medicine, so I was there, but I felt like I wasn't there because I was like, I can't breathe. And so that's something to consider if like the bride and groom, especially, or any family members have bad allergies the springtime. You want to kind of maybe look and see. I know the Farmer's Almanac, I think they have like a pollen count you can check out to see like, hey, this date might be the worst time for pollen. And of course, if you have something indoors, that will definitely help with the pollen and all the craziness of that. One thing too in the springtime is daylight savings. Time changes, and it's a really great thing because you will actually have more time outside to take pictures. It will be lighter outside, which all photographers are like, yes, it doesn't get dark at 5 o'clock, and you can have more time. So when you are planning your wedding and thinking about what season that you're gonna do, definitely think of like, what time of day is important to me, and what time does the sun set? And that is more prevalent, I think, in the fall and winter because, you know, it starts to get dark like 5 o'clock, which is crazy. So the next season I want to talk about with you guys is summer. Summer is, I think summer used to be really popular with weddings, and now it's kind of not really. It's kind of on the back burner. I think summertime, I noticed, is more popular with like teachers because you are off of school and you have that break, which is great because then you are less stressed. You can go on a honeymoon that's longer, different things like that. But one thing I think with summer, here's a couple things just to think about when you are planning, if you are having a summer wedding, is it can be really hot. How many of you guys have been to a wedding in the summer and it's outside? It is just hot. And in Atlanta, in the summer, especially like July and August, it can be so blazing hot. So that's one thing to think about. If you are having a summer wedding, I would highly recommend having the ceremony possibly indoors if you think the temperatures are going to be just so unbearable, especially if you have older guests. If you have grandparents that are coming to your wedding, definitely think about them because sitting in the heat is just not, it's just not good for you. And one time I went to a wedding and everyone is just sweating and you're outside and it's just like, ah. So maybe if you do have your ceremony outside, maybe offer water to your guest because you don't want anybody passing out or getting dehydrated or anything like that. So definitely get some water for them, or maybe fans. I've seen that at weddings. But also be thinking about what you're wearing as well. I went to a wedding and the poor bridesmaids, you could see it was just so hot. Everyone was sweaty, but you could definitely on their dresses, just the type of material it was, you could see just like sweat splotches. And that was really hard to fix and Photoshop and stuff, and you can only try so much to make it not look so crazy. But definitely be thinking of that. Like, hey, if we pick, this color bridesmaid dress, if they sweat at all, it's gonna show. Especially if your ceremony is outside. That's just crazy. So it can be sweaty, it can be hot. One tip I would say if you have a summer wedding for brides and bridesmaids is definitely consider having professional makeup and hair done, because they have some just magical potions and lotions that can make things last longer, especially in the Georgia heat. You don't want it to melt off and your hair get all frizzy and crazy. So I would highly recommend doing professional makeup and hair, because they have some really great stuff. They know what they're doing. But summer, I think as well, is kind of a slower season for most photographers. At least for me, I'm not booking a lot of weddings in like August because it's just so hot. So that's one thing that you can consider when you are picking a date. You could possibly have something indoors and book all the vendors that you really love, even though it's hot. So that's just something to consider. But summertime can be really fun, especially around 4th of July and stuff like that. And that is one tip as well. In the summer, there are a lot more festivals and things going on in Atlanta. So just make sure that your wedding date, especially if it's inside the perimeter, if there's any kind of festivals, like I know there's Dragon Con going on in the summer, and there can be a lot of traffic. So if your wedding date happens to be on the same weekend, just take that into consideration when you're traveling, because the last thing you want is to be late to your own wedding. That'd be really bad. So, and then the last season, which is the most popular season, and it is my favorite time of year, is fall. I love it. Fall's the best. And in fact, when I got engaged, we were driving back home and I'm sitting in the car, and in my head I'm thinking, okay, right now we got engaged July 1st. So I was like, July, August, September, October, November, like I think we could do a fall wedding. Like I was counting it in my head because that's how much I love the fall. And I was like, oh, we could do a fall wedding. And so the fall, it just feels amazing outside. It's wonderful. The trees start changing color, and I think the trees start changing color the further up north you go. So like early October, mid-October, if you go out to like Blue Ridge, their leaf colors are going to be probably more colorful than what we are seeing here in Atlanta. So I just, the fall is so great. And it's definitely becoming, I would say, the most popular time of year for weddings now, especially October. October is probably the most popular wedding month I've ever seen, which I think some people are surprised by, but if you ask any wedding videographer or photographer, they're like, yep, fall, October, that's the craziest, especially like mid-October on a Saturday. So I'm already almost booked for October of this year, which is crazy. People book out. So that's one of the cons, I would say, of fall, is because it is so popular and so busy that if you are hoping at all to work with a certain vendor or photographer or baker or anything like that, you need to make sure that they're available. So if you're looking at a Saturday date, a lot of people get booked up maybe a year or two in advance, which is crazy. So if you really have your heart set on working with a photographer like me, or maybe even like a food truck. There's a really cool food truck I wanted to use at our wedding, and it was booked. So if there's something like that, one of my tips would be to really think about doing like a weekday wedding, whether it's like a Friday wedding or Sundays. Now Sundays are becoming more popular, but if you did like a weekday wedding Monday through say Friday, chances are you might be able to snag your vendor that you really want to use, because I'm not really booking weddings on Mondays or Tuesdays. But if someone were to contact me and say, hey, would you be able to photograph our wedding on a Monday in October? I would definitely say yes. I'd be like, yeah, let's do this. And I might even offer a discount because of that. So that's a good way you could possibly save money. But since it is the fall, it is really crazy, busy. So you might not be able to get a discount depending on who you talk to. But the fall is awesome. You can do different things that normally the other time of year you can't. So like s'mores make more sense in the fall. Pumpkins make more sense in the fall. They're just things that you can do that normally you can't do any other time of the year. Like if you had pumpkins at your wedding in the summer, it wouldn't really make sense. But the fall is great. So one thing that I would definitely advise for any bride that has a fall wedding is make sure you contact the vendors that you really, really want as soon as possible. Like don't wait, because the more you wait, the harder it is to find a vendor probably. And then another tip would be time change. Time change happens in the fall, and we lose an hour of sleep, which is awful, but we also lose time outside to take pictures because it starts to get darker sooner, and we're still in that time right now where it gets dark like 5 o'clock. It starts getting dark. I think 5:30 is the official sunset time right now. But in the fall, just make sure you check the calendar to see what day time change happens. Because one, you don't want your guests to be late to your wedding or really, really early or anything like that. So just think about time change, and especially if your ceremony is outside and you want to have like a sunset ceremony or have daylight, definitely look at the sunset times, because I've photographed a couple weddings where the brides, you just didn't think of, oh, what time is sunset? And it's dark outside and you can't see anything. And by the time it is to take pictures of the bride and groom, it's already dark. And, that can be a really big bummer. If you booked a photographer and you were really hoping to do some sunset pictures and the sun is gone, there's not much you can do for that. So I do like to plan with each of my couples their timeline beforehand and look at things like that, the sunset times, to see like, hey, the sunset, it might be dark at the time that you originally planned for your ceremony. So that's just something to think about if photos are really important to you, and daylight, you want some daylight photos. That's really, really important. One thing you should also think of in the fall is hurricane season. So that's more so in September. So if you have a wedding in September, just know that it rains a lot. It rains so much in September. And this last year, you guys, we had all those crazy hurricanes going on, and there was a lot of weddings that got canceled. I saw in some different groups, and that is so crazy. I know September can be kind of hit or miss because it's either really beautiful weather or it's raining and there's a hurricane coming. So just think of that if you do have a September wedding. One of my couples this last year, their wedding was in September, and thankfully their wedding was right before the hurricane hit, like that Monday. So we had perfect weather, but the next day it was like rainstorm. So just think of that when you are looking at venues. If there is any chance that they have like an indoor backup location, definitely have that as your plan B, because man, if you had your wedding at a venue that only offered an outdoor area, that would be really hard. Rain is something that it's really hard to plan around. So I definitely make sure you have a backup plan if you're looking at September or even October, really, if you're from Georgia and you're having a wedding anywhere, y'all know how the weather gets. It can be so crazy. So I would definitely make sure that your venue has a backup plan in case the weather is crazy, or if it snows, or if there's rain, or if there's a hurricane, or anything like that. But other than that, that's pretty much all the tips that I have for you guys. So like I was saying, you know, each season has its pros and cons, and you really want to look at those as you're picking a date or a time of year for your wedding or your engagement session. Definitely keep those things into consideration. And two, like in the fall and spring, a lot of times for wedding vendors, if you do reach out to them and say you email them or call them on a Saturday, just know that they might be at a wedding. I do have my office hours posted on my Facebook page and on Google, but just know that if you don't hear from them on a Saturday, it's probably because they are at a wedding. And that goes for families and newborn sessions and everything like that as well. It's not that we are, you know, slow to email you back, as I think we're just trying to serve our clients the best and give them our undivided attention when we are photographing their wedding. So just know that if you do contact a vendor during those peak wedding seasons, you might not hear from them until that Monday. So just know that. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and talking about wedding seasons and the pros and cons of all of them. And I'm really excited about the next couple weeks. I've actually talked with a couple other wedding vendors that I've loved working with, and I'm going to feature them on here. So next week we're going to have a guest on Monday, and I'm excited to share what we're going to talk about. For right now it's going to be a secret, but we're going to have a guest next week. So y'all get ready. And until then, I'm going to go pack and we're going to move. So the next time I talk to you guys, we'll actually be living somewhere else, which is crazy. We're not moving far away. So if I'm photographing your wedding, don't worry. I'm literally moving like 15 minutes away. But anyways, if y'all have any questions for me about seasons or wedding photography or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to talk to you guys. But until then, I will talk to y'all later. Thanks for watching. Bye.